Today we're going to be learning Pesachim, Daf Kuf Yud Tet. It's the Daf for Shabbat. Today's Daf is dedicated by Tova and David Kesterbaum in memory of Tova's grandmother, Ida Rifkin, Alah Shalom. Chaya Chasha Bat Tzvi Ze'ev V'Leah Yenta. She was a wonderful babi. I will always remember how she davened with tremendous kavanah 3 times a day. We should continue to be a Militzat Yosher for our family, Klal Yisrael, and the world. We're going to start at the very, very bottom of Kuf Yuchad Amabet. We were talking about a statement of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, who talked about the great wealth that the Romans had amassed, and how all that eventually, based on a verse in Daniel, is going to go to us, L'cha l'chavercha, right, to you and your friends, and l'chavrutcha. So, what does this mean? Who's going to get it? It said in the verse, Sacha ve'enena kodesh Hashem lo yatzer v'lo yichasen ki liyoshvim lifnei Hashem, and soon we're going to get to even the end of that verse, which we're going to darshan also. So it's going to go to those sitting before God. Who are those sitting before God? Amar Rabbi Elazar, zeh makir makom chavero b'yeshiva. This is someone who knows where his friend sits in the yeshiva. Meaning, you live in the yeshiva so much, you're always there in the Beit Midrash, that you know where everybody sits. Some people say that Amar Rabbi Elazar, there was a different version of what he said. Zeh makabel pnei chavero b'yeshiva. This is someone who greets everybody when they come into the yeshiva. My lemichse atik. Now the end of the verse said it's going to be lemichse atik. Who's the michase atik? The one who covers up the old. What does that mean? Zeh mechase dvarim shekisa atik yomin. This is someone who covers up those things that God Himself covered up. Umaynihu. What are these things? Mayninhu. What are these things? Sitrei Torah. The secrets of the Torah. Secrets of the Torah that God didn't want people to know. This is someone who helps them keep secret. Be kept secret. Some people say it's actually someone who reveals things that God, atik yomin, is that who live forever, basically, or who's been there for many, many years. The ta'amei Torah, what the reasons are. This is somewhat hidden, but it's something that God meant for people to reveal. We're now going to have another statement. We're going to have Rav Kahana saying in the name of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, my dichtiv l'menatzeach mizmor l'David. Why does it say l'menatzeach mizmor l'David? This is from Tehillim, right? I'm going to praise the menatzeach mizmor l'David. So what's the menatzeach? So menatzeach comes from the root of to win, right? You fight with someone, you win. So zamru l'mi shenotzchino tov v'sameach. We're going to give praise to someone who, when you beat him, he's actually happy, right? We all know what it's like when you play a game. Everybody wants to win. Nobody's happy when they lose. So who's the one who's happy when his children or other people beat him? This is God. This, by the way, is a reference, or possibly a reference, to the story, the famous story of Tanu Rosh Halachnai. Heavenly voice came down and said, we possibly have Eliezer ben Horkanes, but the rabbis disagreed, and the rabbis said, we're going to go by what we say and not by what the heavenly voice says, reminiscent of what we saw a few days ago about the heavenly voice. And then a heavenly voice comes down and says, Nitzchuni banai, or I forget exactly how the story ends, but you hear God speaking at the end of that story saying, Nitzchuni banai, Nitzchuni banai. My sons have beaten me. In other words, they have their own interpretations that are not what I intended. And God views this as a good thing. Okay, you could view it as a bad thing, but God views it as a positive thing. At least the story tells us, right? We don't know what God thought, but the story tells us that this was a positive thing. So now we're going to see, we're going to say, Bo re'eh shelo k'midat hakadosh baruch hu midat basar v'dam. Okay, this is just explaining it. God is not like humans. Midat basar v'dam menatzchino tov v'atzev. Normally you get beaten and you're sad. But aval hakadosh baruch hu notzchino tov v'sameach. He is happy when he rejoices when he is beaten. Shenemar, how do we know this? By Yomer, we're not quoting a pasuk from Tehillim, but it's about Moshe. Right, God wanted to destroy us if it weren't for Moshe, who came out to bat for us and said, please don't destroy us, right? Who came beperetz lefanav, right? He came and made a whole claim against that, and God was happy with this. Amar Rav Kahana mishum Rabbi Yishmael b'Rabbi Yossi. Another thing he says in his name, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish mishum Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah. My dichtiv. Okay, so I guess that this was said by two different people. My dichtin is it said also Rav Kahana said in the name of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah. That's Rabbi Yehuda, the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. My dichtiv yidei adam mitachat kampehem. We're now quoting from the famous Me'aseh Merkava in Sefer Yechezkel, and it says there's this image of the hands of man coming from under their wings of the ofanim that were there. These types of angels that were there in the image. Now, Notice it says v'yedei Adam, but it's actually written as v'yedo Adam, a singular. Yado ktiv. So why is it a singular yad? Whose hand is it? This is the hand of God that's under the hand of the chayot. Those are the angels. He's there to accept the Baalei Tshuva, those who want to return to him from the Midat Hadin. So his hand is under there to bring people in. Okay, even when the Midat Hadin, the attribute of justice, is trying to do justice with them, God brings them in and say, no, we're going to allow them to repent, and we're not going to judge them for their deeds. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Okay, we're now back to the subject of all this wealth. All the money, gold and silver in the world, Yosef collected when he was in Egypt. He brought it to Egypt, Shenemar. How do we know this? He took all the money that there was, he gathered it. Right? So they assume this means everywhere. Well, only Allah Sheberetz Mitzrayim Sheberetz Canaan. Now, we didn't read the end of that pasuk. But the end of that pasuk is Kol HaKesef HaNimtza Be'eretz Mitzrayim U'Be'eretz Canaan. In specifically those lands. So how did we get to the whole world? B'shal haratzot minayin. Talmud Lomar b'chol haaretz ba'al Mitzrayim. It says everybody there went to Egypt. So therefore, he must have collected all the money in the world. Obviously, the story is a bit of an exaggeration, but they want to make a point. Shalu Yisrael miMitzrayim, when they came out of Egypt, now we see what point they're trying to make. That really, when the Jews took all this stuff from the Egyptians in the Exodus from Egypt, which we've been talking about all this time, they actually didn't take Egyptian money. They took money that was theirs to begin with, because Yosef, he collected all this. Now, it's not exactly true. It was his, but he was the one who succeeded in collecting all this money. So they kind of took their own thing back. How do we know this? It said they took the stuff from the Egyptians. Now, Yinatzlu is a bit of a strange word, right? So where do we get this Yinatzlu? What does it mean? They made Mitzrayim look like it was a storage house that doesn't have any grains in it. In other words, they emptied them out entirely. Like a net that doesn't have fish. It's a different type of image. Okay, right? One sounds like they emptied out all their storage houses. The other sounds like they had something where they could collect things that it was just empty. Now, what happened to all this money? So it was sitting aside until Rechavam came. What happened in the time of Rechavam? Shishak comes to fight against Rechavam, and he takes all that money. How do we know this? Allah Shishak Melech Mitzrayim, in the 5th year of the reign of the king of Rechavam. He was the son of Shlomo HaMelech when the kingdom split. And Shishak Melech Mitzrayim comes al Yerushalayim, v'yikach et otzrot Beit Hashem v'otzrot Beit HaMelech. So they assume that the otzrot Beit HaMelech, the king's treasures, are these treasures that came from Yosef, that came out with the Jews out of Egypt. Now, what happened to them after? But we're going to now trace where all this money went. Ba Zerach Melech Kush, unitalomi Shishak. So the king of Kush, he comes and takes it from Shishak. Ba Asa unitalomi Zerach Melech Kush. Now, Asa comes and gets this. He was a king of Yehuda, the Judean kingdom. He takes it back from Zerach. He gets what was his originally. This is all based on different verses. The Gemara doesn't tell us all of them. Hadrimon ben Tavrimon. Okay, his name is not mentioned explicitly in the Tanakh, but it seems to be Hadad. They say, Ba'u b'nei Ammon unitalu mehadrimon ben Tavrimon. Okay, then the b'nei Ammonim come. Okay, there's this story with Asa and Hadad, and he goes to give Asa gives Hadad money in order to appease him. If I remember all the details correctly. And then, so from there, Bnei Ammon come and they take it from Hadrimon ben Tavrimon. Ba Yehoshaphat unitalomi bnei Ammon. This is basically just showing that the same money just keeps, right? It's almost mocking, right? What happens in the world? Things just, what goes around comes around. Okay, we're going to see that. So now, what happens? Ba Yehoshaphat, who is the king of Yehuda, and he takes it back from Bnei Ammon. In other words, he got it from the Ammonim, who got it from Hadrimon ben Tavrimon. So Ba Yehoshaphat unitalomi bnei Ammon, v'hayamunach ad Achaz. So the Jews had it from Yehoshaphat until Achaz, the king. Ba Sancheirav unitalomi Achaz. What happens? Sancheirav comes and fights against Achaz. He takes it from him. Ba Chizkiyahu unitalomi Sancheirav. Chizkiyahu gets it back from Sancheirav because he wins this battle against Sancheirav. Vayamunach ad Tzidkiyahu. And that was with the Jews until Tzidkiyahu. We know he was the king when the destruction happens. Ba'u kastim unitalo Tzidkiyahu, right? The Babylonians come and they take it away. Ba'u parsiim unitalu kastim. The Parsiim come and take it from the Kastim. The Ba'u Yevanim unitalu Parsiim, right? Then come the Greeks. It's like a brief run through of Jewish history. Ba'u Romiyim, it's the history from the perspective of the Jews, of all the people who conquered us, and then conquered others, obviously. And then we were living under their reign, right? We were first under the Bavalim, then the Persians, right? Then the Greeks, and then the Romans we're going to get back to. So now we get all full circle. It went to the Romans and it's still in the hands of the Romans. And that's where we started today when we said, well, eventually it's going to come back to those who sit and study in the yeshiva, basically. You can see where the rabbis are getting at. They want to basically say you'll get your rewards, right? Even if now you don't have a lot of money because you're sitting and learning, eventually you'll get your reward. There were 3 treasures that Joseph hid in Egypt. Interesting to see what happened to them. Okay, we're going to see that Korach was very wealthy, and they assume he must have gotten this wealth from Yosef. They're basically going to say all wealth could be traced to Yosef, because look at him in the Torah. He was very wealthy, and he amassed a major amount of wealth in Egypt, and apparently some of it he was able to keep for himself. Okay, there's a big question about how he actually was able to keep it for himself. Wasn't it for the king of Egypt? And they try to explain exactly how he did things in a way that some of it was actually his. So Echanit Galeh Korach. So Korach ends up with one of them. Echanit Galeh Antoninus ben Asvirus. Okay, some Roman, it seems, right? Antoninus. I assume he's the Antoninus, the famous Antoninus, Anthony, the Caesar. And one is in waiting for the tzaddikim for the future, for those righteous people. So now we're going to see how we know that Korach had a lot of money. Osher shamor leba'alav lera'ato. Okay, this is a verse from, I assume it's from Mishlei. No, it's from Kohelet. Sorry, I forgot. They're similar. Yesh ra'ach chola ra'iti tachat hashemesh. There's some bad under the sun. What's that? Osher shamor leba'alav lera'ato. People who save their wealth to do bad things. This is Korach, because he was so wealthy and he was arrogant. He went against Moshe, from getting arrogant from that. So Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Zo Oshro shel Korach. This is Korach's money. How do we know he had all this money? Because it says, Bet kol yakum asher b'ragleihem. When he gets swallowed up, it says, and all the yakum asher b'ragleihem. What does it mean that was in their feet? What does that mean? Amar Rabbi Elazar, Zeh mamono shel adam shema raglav. What does it mean? Under asher, that's in his feet. That's what stood him up on his feet, is his money. People's money keeps them up. So that's his money, meaning all of his wealth went under the ground with him. It's interesting because it says that Yosef buried it, presumably underground, and then it ended up back underground with Korach. Amar Rabbi Levi, Masoi shalosh me'ot pradot levanot hayu maftechot beit genazav shel Korach. Okay, just the keys to get to his treasures is obviously one of these exaggerated stories. Took 300 mules, white mules, to carry the keys for his treasures. Vekulu aklite uklipe degalda, and they were all keys and locks that were wrapped in leather, or that were leather somehow. Something about them was leather. They were protected by leather. In other words, he kept them also well. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan. Okay, now that was finishing our whole tangent. Now we're back to Hallel, which is where we started. Amar Rabbi Yonatan, Otcha ki anitani Amar David. Okay, now we're going to go through verses in Hallel, what they reference. Okay, and then we'll get into other things about Hallel. So now we're going to get to all the sections where we repeat the verses, and we're going to talk about who said what verse, what was it said in connection with, and they're all going to be connected to David HaMelech when he becomes the king. If you remember, Shmuel goes to anoint him. He was the youngest of his brothers, the least likely candidate, and Shmuel goes by all the brothers, and in the end, it's David who's chosen. So with Chaki Anitani, I thank you, God, because you answered me. That's David, who was answered, and he becomes king. It's not clear that he was actually vying to be king, but he says, God, you saw my suffering, almost that his brothers really were disrespectful to him. If you remember the whole story with Goliath, when he goes, and with Goliath, and they say, what are you doing here? You should be at home, right? So thank you for answering me. Even masu abonim hayta lerosh pina, the rock that the builders didn't want, which is David, right? His brothers didn't think it was worth anything. Hayta lerosh pina, ends up the main stone. Amar Yishai, that his father said about him. Me'et Hashem haytazot. This was all from God. Amru Achav. His brothers say this must be from God because we don't really understand it. Zeh Yom Asa Hashem Amar Shmuel. Shmuel was so thrilled with with the choice of David, which is interesting because he actually struggled with the whole thing because of Shaul. But we're saying this is a great day that God is anointing a new king. Ana Hashem Oshiana, please save us. Amru Achav. Seems like they're saying save us. In other words, David should be the one who's going to help save us all. Ana Hashem Atzlichana Amar David. That's obvious. You're the king. You're asking for success. Baruch haba b'shem Hashem Amar Yishai. This is based on a verse that there was Kenim, the elders that came to Shmuel when they made this big meal, and they said Baruch haba. So they say it must be it was Yishai who said that, and this is a reference to that pasuk Baruch haba b'shem Hashem. I forget exactly the words he uses, but he uses words that say it doesn't say it here, but he uses words that say like Baruch Hashem or something like that. The greeting to Shmuel. Berachnuchem mi beit Hashem Amar Shmuel. This is when Shmuel, we're now going back in time, when Shmuel gets to the house and he sees all the brothers and he doesn't know who's going to be the one, he says, Berachnuchem, blessed all of you, because I know one of you is going to be king. El Hashem vay'er lanu, right, that God will enlighten us. Amru kulam, seems like maybe all of the family or maybe all the Jews, right, the light should come upon us from this. Isru chad ba'abotim Amar Shmuel. This is about the animals that were bound to, after they would check the animals. Remember we learned that check the animals before they sacrificed them, then they would bind them up until they were ready to be sacrificed. So this is Shmuel before he was about to sacrifice, when they sat and rejoiced after, when David became king. And this is when he gets anointed. So it's talking about the animals. Eli ata v'yodeka Amar David, you are my God and I will thank you. Again, David praising God. Elohai aromemeka amru kulam. This is kind of like a zimun. He calls out and then they answer. Nan hatan, back to other issues of Hallel. This is a Mishnah in Sukkah about Hallel. Also there, Hallel comes up because of the holiday of Sukkot. Makom shenahagu lichpol yichpol. If you double the psukim, you repeat the psukim, then you should. Some people, if you notice, when we say Hallel, we repeat some of the verses, word for word. Even the verses themselves, without the repetition, some of the verses are somewhat repetitive in the section, right? Hodu Lashem ki tov kilom chasto, and then we have, it also ends with Hodu Lashem ki tov kilom chasto. There's also Yomar Na Yisrael, Yomar Na Yirei Hashem. There's psukim that almost sound like they're repeating one for one. Or Sabuni chidvorim do'achu ke'esh chosim, and Sabuni gam sevavuni. There's a lot of almost repetition, and maybe because of that, or not sure, but some people would double every verse in Hallel. Wow, that would make Hallel pretty long. But if that's your minhag, that's what you do. Lifshot, yifshot. If you do it without just regular, then you keep your minhag, your custom. Levarech acharav yivarech. Some people didn't make the blessing after. At the end, when we say Hallelujah, and then we say a little paragraph and then a blessing. Not everybody does that. Hakol kiminhag medina. You do according to your custom. This sounds a lot like the 4th chapter. Amar Rabbi, lo shanu ela lacharav. This whole minhag about making a bracha is only after, but obviously, aval lefanav mitzvah levarech. But everybody knows the mitzvah to make the blessing in the beginning of Hallel. When we say Asher Shem Tzavanu likro et Hallel, to read the Hallel, that everybody does. How do we know this? Every blessing we make a bracha before we do the action. Talked about this also recently. My mashma dahai over lishnadach dumehu. This is a sugya we've seen before. How do you know when it says over lasiyatan? It means to do before. So how do we know that? We're going to have 3 verses. We have this whole sugya somewhere else. He was running to deliver a message and he passed the kushi. It means he got there first. This is a verse from in Brishat, right? This is Yaakov when he goes to meet Esav, and he went before his family. He went first. Third option, this is in Sefer Micha, and it's talking about in the future, the Melech HaMashiach is going to go first, and then Hashem is the leader. So he's going to go also before everybody. Tanya. So Vayavor means first. Tanya. Now we're going back to Hallel. We're going to see different opinions about doubling the psukim, repeating them. Rebbe kofel badvarim. Rebbe would double some of them. Presumably, some of them are fresh say he means the last 4. If you know at the very end when we say Baruch haba b'shem Hashem, those 4 verses. He adds more. Okay, we don't know what that means right now. My mosif, what does that mean? He starts from odcha, earlier than that, and he does double. And this is what we do. We double every pasuk from odcha until the end. Darish Rav Avira. Zimnin amar le'mishmei derav, zimnin amar le'mishmei derav. Should be Rav Asi. So, Rav Avira, sometimes darshaned in the name of Rav, and sometimes he said the name Rav Asi. My dachti vayigdal ha'yela v'yigamel. We're now on Yitzchak. When Yitzchak was old enough, they made a party for him. Abraham made a big meal. And the question is, why does it say vayigdal ha'yela v'yigamal? Because it already said vayi bayom higamel, when he already was weaned. And then it says, right, it says he grew up and was weaned. And then it says, and on the day he was weaned, they made a party. So why does it say it twice? It's a reference to a future meal, okay, which God is going to make for the righteous people on the day that he decides to give chesed, to do good to the descendants of Yitzchak. What's going to happen at that meal? After everybody eats and drinks, so he's going to give the cup to Avram to make the blessing. And what's Avram going to say? He's going to say, I'm not worthy because look, Yishmael came out of me. Look, I brought bad to the world, right? I'm not worthy. And I wasn't perfect. Yitzchak, there's an interesting scenario, right? You can imagine everybody, and we're going to see, everybody says, I'm not worthy, I'm not worthy. Everyone knows there's situations where some people don't want the respect that they're trying to give them. And here, everyone's going to say, I'm not worthy, I'm not worthy. Each of them has something wrong about them, right? This is interesting about, do you need to be perfect, right? Perfectionism, is that a value, right? We all make mistakes. We all have things that aren't perfect, but yet maybe they're still not ra'oi for this meal where God's going to have someone bless. This is the meal of meals. We're going to need someone who maybe is perfect. So let's see if we can find someone like that. Omer lo Yitzchak, tolu barech. So God goes to Yitzchak and says, you make the bracha. Omer lahem, eni mevarech. I can't. Shetzami meni Esav. I have Esav that came from me. Omer li Yaakov, tolu barech. Omer lahem, eni mevarech. Why not? Now you might think, oh, Yaakov already has 12 children, all within the Jewish people. But he says, I did something wrong. What did I do? Nasati shtei achayot. I married two sisters b'chayehem while they were still alive. Shatida Torah la'osran alai. Ultimately, the Torah is going to say it's forbidden to do that. And look what I did. Omer lo Moshe, tolu barech. So he says to Moshe, do it. You make the bracha. Omer lahen, eni mevarech, shelo zachiti l'kanes la'eretz Yisrael. I wasn't worthy to go into Israel. Lo b'chayai v'lo b'moti, not even in my death. Omer lo liYoshua, tolu barech. Omer lahen, eni mevarech. I can't do it either. Shelo zachiti leben. I never had sons. Shneimar, how do we know? It seems like he didn't even have any children. When it talks about the genealogy, it's not clear. Maybe it goes on to mention them, but it talks about the genealogy in Sefer Divrei Hayomim. It says Nun beno, right? Nun is his son. That was the grandfather of Yoshua. Had a son called Nun. That's why he's Yoshua ben Nun. And then Yoshua beno, and that's the end of the verse. And it doesn't talk about any future generations. Omer lo leDavid tolu barech. So say to David, you should do it. Okay, here we get back to David, and maybe this is why we're trying to praise David, because it's attributed to him all of Hallel. It says, I can do it. We quote a verse from Tehillim where he says, right? I will carry the cup of the redemption, and in the name of God I will call. He's the one who ultimately is going to be given the cup at the meal of God. So here you have that. I just want to see one thing. I think, right. It seems it's not that God was asking each of them. It was the people at the meal are going to offer the cup to all these people, and then they're all going to reject it until ultimately we end with David, and he's going to be the one who's going to drink this kos yeshuot. Okay, this we say in Havdalah every week. Okay. New Mishnah. Our last Mishnah about, not the last Mishnah in the parak, but our last Mishnah directly about things that happen at the Seder. Very famous Mishnah. Firstly, he's mentioned in our Haggadah, this Mishnah, in the answer given to the Chacham. We've mentioned this before. The Chacham is told, right, we teach him Ilchot HaPesach, specifically this halacha. Now, some people read it as it's not ein maftirin. We don't teach him specifically this halacha. It's that we teach him ad ein maftirin, and then it's really a reference to all the mishnayot of this chapter until you get to the very last one, which is ein maftirin achar pesach afikoman, which in my mind sounds like the best shot of that answer. Seems like the best explanation, because otherwise, why specifically highlight this one as opposed to any other one? One could come up with reasons for sure, but I think the simple reading is that it really means teach him all the Hilchot Pesach until the very last one. Now, there's a bunch of strange things in here. What is maftirin? Maftirin is when somebody is niftal, they die. That's a nice way of saying someone died in Hebrew. So it means at the end. So you don't end the meal after the Pesach with afikoman. Now, afikoman clearly comes from the Greek. What does it mean? We don't exactly know. And we're going to have some different interpretations where it comes from. So really from the Greek, afikoman was this party. It was like the after party. So some people explain, Professor Lieberman explains in his commentary that this is a reference to the after party that they used to have at the time. And based on the Yerushalmi brings an opinion that we won't see in our Gemara about that it means musical instruments. And it means don't bring out musical instruments because we have other things to do at the Seder. We have to say Hallel. We have to get through really it's Hallel. Mirza is added later, but we have to get through Hallel still. So don't start this after party when you're done with your meal because there's still more to go. We're going to see different explanations what this means. My afikoman. What is afikoman? Amarav shaloya. We're going to have 3 different answers in the Bavli. Question is, how many real different answers are there? Don't move from one group to another. Oh, this reminds us of what we learned about the Korban Pesach. You're not allowed to be in 2 different groups. Remember, people would sign up, register for an animal, and then they would slaughter that animal for all those people in the group, and you can't switch groups. So if you start eating one group, you can't go to another. So what it means is don't go after the Pesach to another group. That's what they mean, afikoman. Some people explain, I think it's the Rashbam who says, afikoma means afiku manaichu. Take out your kelim. Take out your dishes. We actually made reference to this a few days ago when we said to one of the shedim, panu manaichu, remember, or they said there were all the spirits in the tree, and then it said panu manaichu, get rid of your kelim, right? I heard them saying, let's quickly get out of here. So it's the same reference here, afiku manaichu. Take out your kelim, meaning don't do that. Don't take your kelim and move to someone else's house because you might end up eating in a different group. You might end up eating the Pesach with them. Shmuel Amar Kagon or Delali goes ala. Once you finish eating the Korban Pesach, you can't eat. Now, some people explain that this means desserts. Okay, this is either kamehim v'pitriot, like truffles and mushrooms. Truffles meaning mushroom truffles, not chocolate truffles. Because alai ala abba are chicks that they would apparently eat for dessert. That's one explanation. This sounds more like our desserts, dates and nuts and roasted grains, which is what we saw. That's what you give the kids, right? Those are the sweets, the desserts. Not exactly all the desserts that we always eat, but you can see them. Tanya Kavatedra Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so now we don't know why they don't want people eating desserts after, right? The assumption is probably they don't want us to take away the taste of the Korban Pesach. We want that to be the last thing you eat. Also, why do we want it to be the last thing you eat? There's this halacha, which we saw way back, which is, I think on Pesachim Ayin, you need to eat the Korban Pesach ala sova, when you're satiated. So you eat it at the end of the meal, it should be the last thing you eat. And therefore, don't eat anything after. According to this, they both seem to be saying the same thing. It's just a matter of, one said, this is what I eat for dessert, and that's what I eat for dessert. That's what it even says, or delay li, that I eat the mushrooms and truffles, and goes alai ala abba. Abba, which is a reference to Rav, he eats these chicks. So, everyone for whatever dessert they eat. It's just don't eat desserts. And Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina bring a different example of desserts. So that's one way of reading it. The Ran is a whole different way of reading this sugya. He thinks that all of them think the issue is the same as Rav. We don't want you going to another place and eating there. So according to Rav, it means don't get up and move. But according to Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, it means don't eat anything after, because if you do, even in your own house, we're worried that you might come to eat in someone else's house. And then Shmuel saying it's only meat. And Rabbi Yochanan saying, no, it's even desserts. Shmuel saying if you eat meat, there's a concern you might go eat meat somewhere else. But desserts, we're not really worried about. That's something different. And then it doesn't have to do with the taste in the mouth at all. But others say it has to do with the taste in the mouth. And there's different reasons why that would be. Either the sova issue, there's other possibilities. Okay, next. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So now, according to the first reading of Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, we're going to see a different reading on tomorrow's daf. But right now, we're going to read the first one, which is and then we're going to have a mirror image of the sugya, because according to the second reading, it's going to say the opposite. And we're going to now bring proofs and questions, and all those proofs and questions are going to flip in the opposite interpretation. Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, which would seem to imply what? If you couldn't eat after matzah, then it would have said the same thing by matzah. It would have said it by matzah, not just by Pesach. So the fact that it only says Pesach, much means it's only Pesach, not matzah, which goes against Shmuel. But the Gemara rejects that and says, no, you could say the Mishnah is a lo mabaya structure, which means what? Lo mabaya achar matzah, lo mabaya kamar. It's a lo mabaya structure, which means lo mabaya means you don't even need to say a case that's so obvious. We're only going to tell you the case that's less obvious. So lo mabaya achar matzah, we don't need to tell you after matzah. Why? It's less of an issue after matzah. Dilo nafish tamai. We want the Pesach matzah to stay in your mouth. That will remind you not to go eat anywhere else, or it will be the last thing that you eat, and therefore we want it to stay in your mouth. So lo mabaya achar matzah, dilo nafish tamai. After matzah, it doesn't even have such a strong taste. So you don't even need, and it has a weak taste. Of course, you can't eat anything after. It'll clearly wash out the taste of matzah. Aval achar Pesach, but after the Pesach, the nafish tamei, meat has a strong taste. It'll stay in your mouth anyway. Maybe lo matzeh abure late lamba. Maybe it's not a problem, and you could eat after. You might have thought late lamba. It's not an issue, and as the taste is not going to leave your mouth, and therefore maybe you are allowed to eat dessert because you'll still have the meat taste in your mouth. Kamash malan. That's why it comes to the Mishnah, says specifically matzah. Pesach, even though it also means matzah, it's just you don't mean obviously matzah. Also Pesach, you might have thought not, and yes, you actually can't eat after the Pesach either, even though there's less of a chance you'll lose the taste in your mouth. Nema, so that was an attempt to knock out the opinion from our Mishnah, and now we rejected that. So as I said, when we have the opposite reading, we're going to use it as a proof, and then we're going to say, no, it's not necessarily proof, because we'll see. Maybe this source will help prove it. These are all different types of desserts. You can fill up your stomach with them on Pesach. At the Seder night, as long as you eat a kazayat matzah at the end, which sounds like the matzah has to be the very last thing you eat, which sounds to prove what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. But we're not in barishona lo. It sounds like at the end, yes, but at the beginning, no. In other words, at the beginning, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't at the end. So they say lo mabaya kamar. No, it means you can't eat you can eat these, right? Even at the end. Okay. In other words, as long as you eat a kazayim matzah b'achorna, no, you can even eat a kazayim matzah b'rishona and then fill up your stomach with them also. So why are they telling you this then? Lo mabaya kamar. Lo mabaya b'rishona deka'achal le'te'avon. I'll repeat this again in the next class because it's in the next stuff, but I just didn't want to finish mid-sentence. You don't even need to say barishona, because in the beginning, you're eating l'te'avon. You're eating just because you're hungry. Aval b'achrona, dilma'ata l'mechal achila gasa. In the beginning, you're starved when you get to the matzah. So of course you're fulfilling the mitzvah. But when you eat the matzah at the end, maybe you're not going to fulfill the mitzvah because maybe you're going to be on a full stomach. So maybe you're not allowed to eat. Emalo, you might have thought that you can't eat because before you get to this matzah. So therefore, kamash malan, that you can eat them as long as yochal kazayat matzah b'achrona. You still have to eat the kazayat matzah at the end, even though, right, we're not worried it's going to be achila gasa. So therefore, what it means is you can eat, right, sorry, one second. You don't even need it at the beginning. Right, sorry, just one quick second. You can't eat anything. Right. You might have thought that you can't eat, or that you can't eat anything in the beginning. The point is you can eat not only at the beginning, it means you can eat after the first and you can even eat after the second. It's just that, and therefore this doesn't prove anything. It's just that we're telling you, you might have thought that you can't because you might have filled up your stomach from them, and it would be achila gasa when you eat at the end. Kamash malan, no. You still eat at the end, the matzah at the end, and it's not coming at all to talk about whether or not you can eat after the second one. Okay, we'll start back up with this in the shiur on Sunday morning. Have a great weekend, Shabbat Shalom or Shabbat Tov, and we'll pick up from here on Sunday.